Matt Gaetz first.
Thank the gentleman for yielding, Mr. Chairman. I think what we just observed was a drive-by committee presence from the gentlelady from Missouri. And what I would reflect on is that if someone is the victim of an armed robbery, they don't need a green space. They need a local government willing to fund their local police department. If someone is about to be stabbed, as one of the witnesses was at our field hearing in New York, they don't need a therapist. They need force to be able to respond back, and they need the law on their side, which is why I've introduced a national stand your ground bill that I believe the committee ought to hear. And if your car's being broken into, you don't need wraparound services, you need a detective. Day in and day out, people in the communities run by Democrats feel less safe. And the reason they feel less safe is because they don't feel like the law is on their side. And by the way, funding up the FBI and the ATF and the censorship industrial complex at the DHS isn't what they need. It's local police, and those are the folks whose backs we have and who you all have spent years denigrating.
Will gentleman yield?
Gentleman's time has expired. Does the gentleman wish to speak on the bill, or we got an amendment coming? I'll recognize if you. I
appreciate it, Mr.
Right.
Chairman. I just want to say this. I mean, I think the rhetoric's over the top down there. I mean, I was a prosecutor for 12 years. I've been endorsed by the FOP every time I've run for office. People in my jurisdiction, by the way, don't want to get rid of the FBI and the ATF. They're very glad that we have them. When I was a prosecutor, we coordinated our prosecutions with them. It's called Project Exile. I believe it was started by the Bush administration, by the way. But we tried to do that to get gun offenders off the streets and to make sure that serial offenders got more jail time because they got more serious sentences in the federal courts. The FBI and the ATF led those efforts in those prosecutions. And by the way, the Sinaloa cartel takedown that just happened 2 weeks ago, there were no local police involved with that. You know why? They don't have jurisdiction to do it. FBI, ATF, Homeland Security, all were involved in those in that takedown. When you guys complain about not doing enough to stop fentanyl, guess who it is that's working it? It's FBI, it's ATF, it's DEA, all these federal agencies that you want to get rid of. We need them to do that work. I think we also need the local police to do the work too. And if you find some place where Glenn Ivey said defund the police, I'd love to see it. But I think we need both. I'm glad that you all see the need to have, I think I'm hearing today, federal law enforcement handle cases as well. We need the Department of Justice, we need the FBI, we need the ATF, we need the DEA. We need help from all of them to deal with the major international problems that we've got going. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes himself. Yield to the gentleman from Florida.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I wouldn't want anyone in the minority on the committee to be of the view that we think that every single Democrat holds the defund the police view. Matter of fact, we don't think that, and I think the gentleman was correct in referencing we've got Democrats who've been a part of keeping our community safe, and we thank you for that. You're patriots for offering to do that. But when the Democratic Party elevates to the position of chair of the crime subcommittee, the very leader of the defund police movement, you don't have to be for the defund police movement to be supportive of, I think, some pretty dangerous platforming of ideas that make people in our communities less safe. And there's been much discussion of these crime rates. And what I've noticed is that in some places, the crime rate may be higher in red places because those crimes are actually acknowledged practically with arrests and criminal process, where in a lot of places like New York, things like shoplifting aren't even a crime anymore.
Would the gentleman yield for a moment?
I would.
Would you agree that it's helpful to have the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, and the Department of Justice to prosecute federal crimes? Would you think it's a good idea to keep them around?
Just as you've not called to defund the local police, I haven't called to completely defund the FBI. What I've said is if they don't come to heal, and if they are not responsive and constrained by their authorities, because Mr. Ivey, I think it is fair.
Gentleman from Florida controls time.
I think it is fair to be critical of an ATF that imposes zero tolerance on people, and then they lose their own guns. They keep records in the hundreds of thousands they're not
Would the
supposed to
gentleman
keep,
yield?
and then they don't.
I just want to ask about your legislation.
Yeah,
'Cause
I'm
your
eager
legislation
to
is
discuss
one
it.
line.
Yeah.
And all it says is, we're going to shut down the ATF. It doesn't say anything about all of the other stuff you just mentioned.
Well, that's
All
because
it
I was
does is
talking
it
about
says
the
we're gonna shut it
FBI.
down.
As to the ATF, I would invite your co-sponsorship to that legislation.
I think it's crazy. Why would you want to defund the ATF?
Because the ATF has so greatly exceeded their authority, they are punishing regular Americans with no basis and soaked in the hypocrisy of seizing documents and holding records that even the Department of Justice, the vaulted Department of Justice that you talk about, their own Inspector General is hammering the ATF. And so that's why I think they maybe need a shot across the bow. But the folks out in our communities that are battling against
Actually, the time belongs to
street
me. I've yielded to the
thuggery,
gentleman.
the folks that are out in our communities, like the witnesses at our field hearing, they count on a cop in their community, and they count on a local government able, willing, determined to fund those local cops. And you heard from an investigator that represented a lot of the detectives out of New York tell you how the advocacy of these policies, which I certainly would agree, not every Democrat holds, but your leadership.
Would the gentleman
seems to
yield for a
embrace it.
moment?
Certainly.
Okay, so your bill, which you just called a shot across the bow.
Correct.
Defund ATF. You think that's a good message to law enforcement?
I think it's a good message to the folks at ATF who are breaking the law.
Well, I tell you what, let's target them. I don't think you have to shut down hold on. You don't have to shut down the whole agency to address any bad apples. That's the same thing with police departments at the local level.
But similarly,
That's
you
what
don't have to
IGs are
maintain the entire agency to do the things that you've talked about regarding the Sinaloa cartel. Just as you may suggest, not every single person at the ATF is a bad person, and I don't think they are. I don't think you need to keep the entire apparatus either. So yes, on the continuum of the ATF, I believe they have done more harm than good when it comes to people's civil liberties, and when it comes to some of these other federal agencies, they do need to come to heel. So that, by the way, Democrats used to believe in civil liberties. You guys used to actually think that when government overreached and violated people's constitutional rights, there was a bad thing.
I must say, we still do. We still do.
So long as these federal agencies will go after Trump and Republicans, they seem to get a lot more attention from you.
I got to say, I've been at this a lot longer than when Trump was president. And we've been able to challenge the FBI, the ATF. I've been on both sides of this. When they cross the line, you prosecute them, you fire them, you deal with that.
But see, all we could do is defund them.
But saying you're going to shut the whole thing down.
Our power is the power of the purse, and we have to be able to use it. And that way, if you've been on both sides of this issue...
Did you send a letter to the IG saying you need to target these bad apples in particular?
We send so many letters to the IG highlighting the things that we're finding in our investigations. And if you've been on both sides, what I would say is, what are you waiting for to get back on our side, on the correct side?
I'm waiting to get back on the majority so we can actually focus on laws
when you were in the majority,
that deal with gun violence
to protect people's rights
and bring down the gun violence.
Juice these agencies with all the powers that they've now weaponized against the people.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Thank you so much. I've got an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.